Okay, so we'll start with this one. And let me pull up the slideshow portion of this and minimize my little window here if I can figure out how to do that. There we go. I don't know why that's there. I got an extra window in front of me that I don't need. And you're going to have to wait. Okay, so this is the Oceana Camp meeting, and it's the first one, Ted Wilson's Aberrations. And so it does, I do have on the first few slides, what she talked about with cultural, liberal, and radical feminism. And those are things that I say as well, review and understand, to understand that when you look back in the time of, in the Millerite history and the abolitionists were radical against slavery. And so there can be some stuff gleaned from that in understanding radical feminism. There's no compromise. And then we understood that this dispensation that we just came out of was the dispensation of compromise, because they're not going to take the stand that is necessary against gender inequality. So anyway, so in 2018, the message of equality was introduced to this movement. Many people since then have found that idea challenging. Where was the message of equality in 2018? What was discussed that year was two streams of information, and we see those two streams here in 2018. Nope, you gotta wait, sorry. Those two streams were, the two streams of information are discussed. And you know, when we're getting the two streams of information message, remember that this had been going on when we look at the line stretched out since CNN and Fox News came in 1996, the formalization of that first dispensation. So we were the ones that were behind, if you remember from some of the present other notes that we've been reviewing. So you won't find the subject of feminism or gender equality articulated in the two streams of information. What you find is a discussion or a message on two streams of information. Why was two streams of information so opposed? And I'll leave that to anybody to think that through. Why was two streams of information so opposed? Think about what each stream represents.
Doesn't it move into sexism? Because, well, like there's the conservative side and the liberal side, and the conservatives are more, I don't know, maybe I just thought maybe that's not correct, because the liberals wear makeup and dresses too. Never mind.
Anybody else?
That doesn't that point out to the right way and the wrong way?
Say that again. That was what?
That it points out to the right way and the opposite is the wrong way.
Yes, it did. The two streams, yeah. And what did each stream represent?
Conservative and liberal
Okay.
mindset.
What's the mindset of the conservative?
Extreme conservative.
Patriarchal.
Patriarchal.
Thus said the Lord.
Patriarchal.
The Lord, holding the Bible, above all reason. That's the biggest thing.
So expand on your answer, Bob. Patriarchal. Uh-oh.
The conservative mindset, you know, had always, you know, left the men in charge of the preaching and the teaching and everything. And I think in large measure, we can only see that looking at it, you know, with a different lens now, because when you're in the middle of it, you don't even see it that way, because you were just accepting the norms of society, the norms in the world the way it is, with how sin has degraded things and caused there to be such a difference between the way men and women are viewed. It was there in the background, I guess. But patriarchy is clearly an issue.
So what did the other side represent?
equality right there, right then and there, because they were looking for the rights of others, the minorities, and for women's rights and all that. So you could see that the backdrop has to do with gender, even back then, even though it's not articulated as it's pointed out right there in your wording.
So why would you say
Can you
that?
hear me?
Somebody's got some background noise. Who is that? And you're trying to talk, I think is what's happening. Who was it? I don't have a screen that pulled up to see who's on here.
It's Victor is trying to talk.
Oh, Victor.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, but you got a lot of background noise.
What the way I like to explain it was the conservative mindset is God is on our side. We can't be wrong.
Okay.
That was one definition that really stood out for me, and I think that was seen in Donald Trump and his mentality when he was in power.
Okay. And also, God is on my side, conservative side, he's on my side. So how does that relate to FFA with in putting that together with what Bob just went through? What side does that say God is on?
Conservative side,
Yeah. What did Bob say?
patriarchy.
Patriarchy. So it was opposed. So even though equality wasn't necessarily as visible as what we might have thought, it was there. There was a few reasons it went against what people wanted, right? It made them uncomfortable. It disagreed with their politics, and they thought the evidence for it was small. And to justify their rejection, or if they said there's the message and then there's opinions of, I won't say leadership, I wasn't a leader then, but opinions of European socialists. So the message, if you take us back to FFA, because underlying, if you think about it, what we were talking about with the arrow being shot, there was an arrow being shot. Did the arrow give all the clear information? No, but it did cause a stir, right? That eventually was a shaking and a falling away. The arrow that of the two streams here, at least, if you put it in that, equality was wrapped up into this message of two streams. So it made them uncomfortable, went against their politics. They didn't have enough evidence, didn't feel that there was enough evidence to support it, or that it was small evidence. And that, let's see, and to justify their rejection of it, they said there's the message and then there's opinions. So they were calling the message from the European socialists an opinion, not fact. So it made them uncomfortable. So you have the conservative side, which is what we all believe God was on the conservative side. And the conservative side is a patriarchal system. But why this message made people uncomfortable was if you agreed with two streams, back then in simple times, you would have to say Republican, Democrat. And in 2018, still fresh from the 2016 election, that is the message of the Battle of Ipsos. And you can call two streams Trump versus Clinton. The minute you do that, there are implications that start hitting people on the subject of gender. So the message of, or the Battle of Ipsos showed the battle being in 2016 between Trump versus Clinton. And when you brought that out, there are implications. And it started hitting people on the subject of gender. Because you have a female running and a male running. And this is a patriarchal system, and God supports the patriarchal system. Therefore, the conservative side is the side that God is on. And so it made them uncomfortable, went against their politics, claimed it wasn't enough evidence, and said that it was the opinion of European socialists. Because everyone knows what happened in 2015. Everyone knows the position the Democrat Party takes on gender. and the subject of gender is embedded in two streams of information. But all the other parts people are uncomfortable with, except for the part that brings you to the subject of feminism. So feminism is an issue in here. All the other parts people are uncomfortable with, except for the part that brings you to the subject of feminism. The problem is that it's precisely the part that makes people uncomfortable. If I was to be blunt, it makes people angry. That brings people to 2019 and the test. So you had 2018, and 2018 takes you to 2019 and the test. 2018, you get the two streams of information. It's making you feel uncomfortable. You're seeing the Battle of Ipsos. You're seeing the Trump versus Clinton. You're understanding feminism is in here and it goes against your politics. It makes you uncomfortable. And then comes the test. So it makes people angry, and that brings people to the test. The increase of knowledge of the Sunday law. So this is the test, but it's the increase of knowledge on the big line for the Sunday law, which places here gender, as we were looking at 2014 and asking the questions about Aaron's presentation, looking back at 2014 and threading the needle through each Sunday law, because this would be the Sunday law for the Levites. It's the increase of knowledge on the big line for the Sunday law. And here you have this issue of feminism here. So, but when did people reject or accept the increase of knowledge of Sunday? When did they accept or reject it? So this is the increase of knowledge. When did they accept or reject it?
In 2018?
2018. When it made them uncomfortable, when it disagreed with their position on their external worldview, when it's thought that there is little evidence, and therefore that they divide between the message they accept and the opinions of some of the leaders. I might have worded that wrong. When it is thought that there is little evidence, and therefore that they divide between the message they accept and the opinions of some leaders. So they start splitting it up to what agrees with them, and the rest is opinions. So in 2018, they already are rejecting the message. I'm not saying our understanding of our last camp meeting is all that Panium consists of, but if this was the increase of knowledge of the Sunday law, and this movement had to recognize the existence of feminism, it is not a minor point to understand feminism more clearly today. So we have the increase of knowledge, and you have the formalization. You have feminism here, you have feminism here. And we need to understand it more clearly today than we did back here. Which a lot of this was brought out to understand the difference between, to me, maybe somebody can better explain this than what I have in my mind of it, but this equality, cultural feminism. I picture it in my mind as the little submissive woman still. You'll give her some tokens of equality and call it equality, but she's still the little woman in her place. I don't know if anybody else is, if anybody has a better way to explain that or not, but it's the, let's see, they have to cooperate, they're binding, they're nurturing, and relationships and their ethics of care. It still puts them in a stereotypical box, women in a stereotypical box. That puts,
I think Phyllis Shepley, if I'm saying her last name right, is the perfect example of cultural feminism.
cultural feminism, yeah, because she was definitely in her little place, right?
Yeah,
As the little wifey.
yeah.
You can go be on the Supreme Court, for instance. Just don't forget your place in society. That's amazing, actually. But I said little at that camp meeting that was new. All that camp meeting was doing was essentially sealing, stamping what had already been taught for almost 18 months. It arrived in 2020 when we started discussing compromise, what I think can be incorrectly termed just reforms, already discussing liberal versus radical feminism. So compromising the reforms was taken as just incorrectly, that's what compromise was referring to, as compromising on the reforms. But it's discussing liberal versus radical feminism. Understanding radical feminism is not new, no newer than bringing in equality in 2019. The problem was all the people sitting on the fence who thought this was new because they thought they had the option of rejecting it. The same thing happened in 2020. This is something to remember here now, to 2021. What led to the increase of knowledge led to the formalization. So what led to the increase of knowledge led to the formalization. So you have the same situation here with feminism that should be understood more clearly now. But in 2020, we made people uncomfortable. We made people angry. It disagreed with their external worldview. They thought there was little evidence. And instead of being European socialists, because this was not understood or accepted, we were seen as conservative Adventists. So when we crossed over that 2019 mark here, then in 2020, and we went through a lot of those presentations where there were those in the movement actually believing that we were being conservative Adventists, because, and it was all the false freedom study, that presentation that she did, and all the talking that she did on false freedom. And what it really demonstrated is we still weren't understanding the issue on feminism.
Elaine,
Yeah.
I find it interesting when the way you have it laid out, where you see the big categories: cultural feminism, liberal mainstream feminism, and radical feminism. I almost realized that whether you're a man or a woman, it was in this movement a few years ago. I think that we were, I'll speak for myself. I was more into the cultural feminism category, and then as God started to move on my heart to understand things, we kind of wanted to get into that fence area where you're in the middle. You're in the middle where you're a liberal mainstream feminism, which is still wrong, because both cultural and liberal feminism start out with the premise that patriarchy is here to stay, and it's wrong. And the radical feminism is when you wake up and you realize that patriarchy is wrong, that God doesn't want it there, it doesn't belong there, it was only in place because of sin and all of its abuses, and it needs to go away. And so I see that as the 3 steps that we all had to kind of go through as God brought us to the right line of thinking.
Looking at it, anything a woman chooses equals empowerment because she chose it, instead of it's yours already, it's your right already. And radicals, if I understand correctly, radicals are fighting for those rights. I mean, I chose a lot of things, may have felt empowered along the way, but I never gave it consideration. Huh?
There's something in there though that Elder Tuss points out, is that they're saying that if I choose to wear makeup and a skimpy dress, I'm still a feminist. But we're saying that if you choose to wear makeup and a skimpy dress, you're objectifying yourself, and
Right.
It's not correct.
Thank you for bringing that up as well. So yeah, it's still not correct, because you're still not practicing the proper feminism. I still have a long ways to go on that too, but you have to understand the picture of equality and the rights of women and the rights of humanity. So thank you for bringing that part up too, because you have and it would go under, I would think, false freedom. I think as well, false freedom, that she can choose to do those things, but it's still not being a radical feminist. We definitely need to spend time on that. I know, myself included. Okay, so made them uncomfortable. So if that be the case, if this is where they rejected the message, then where in this dispensation do they reject the message? They've already rejected it, right? If this was the test here, but they'd already rejected the message here, and this be a test, then they've already rejected here.
Yeah, I think she said they rejected it, but they just haven't left yet.
Right. Right. Okay, so I hope you can see now the position we took in 2020 and take now has never been based on conservatism. Radical feminism is not conservatism. It is combining of what God expects of a people who are bought with a price, who are not allowed to live for themselves. And true feminism, true radical feminism and equality without compromise. So radical feminism is not conservatism. So what Christine was pointing out here, that I can choose to wear a short skirt and lipstick, we don't do that here. That doesn't mean we're conservatives. Okay, radical feminism is not conservatism. It is combining of what God expects of a people who are bought with a price, who are not allowed to live for themselves. And true feminism, true radical feminism and equality without compromise. The problem is by the time it's spelled out, it's too late. So it's rejected back here and now it's being spelled out, but it's already too late. We should all remember the failure of this movement in 2012. I shouldn't say this movement because Elder Parmenter carried that truth all the way through, that the people that thought there was little evidence. So in 2012, remember they rejected, they were already rejected in 2012 before you get to 2014. And so she's putting us back to there where the rejection is before, if you understand that. By the time we arrive at 2021 and we look back at 2014, shining in all its glory, for too many of the people we love, it's too late. You can't afford to divide the message to what suits and what doesn't, to continue to wait for more evidence before accepting. We have too many evidences that God makes us choose before he gives us that evidence. So in 2018, we had what we needed to choose right. And more evidence, though it comes later, confirms one group, if I understand that correctly, and it only enrages the other group more. So when do we accept a message? When are we to accept a message when it's given?
When it's given?
Yeah, I think so. And we're liable to hear a dog bark here in a minute. Sorry. So the personal is political. It's a movement based on the equality of women worldwide, and it's willing to take apart the structures of society necessary. Recognizing that gender inequality, misogyny, is the original sin. So she's calling misogyny gender inequality, saying that it's the original sin, the original inequality from which others have learned and stem. I hope as we look back, we can find it encouraging to see the consistent way that God has led. I want to make one warning. If you had to be careful with your sources to try to understand feminism, you need to be very careful with your sources to understand radical feminism. Remember, we changed dispensation and it got harder. So it gets harder as we continue to progress. And does anybody remember the two distinctions within radical feminism?
in radical feminism, they're against transgender men because they are totally against any men coming in to push in patriarchy, but they're misunderstanding those women. You know, the women, I think I'm saying it wrong. It's transgender women who used to be men. They will not accept them.
Because they still view them as men.
Correct.
They don't accept them for who they are.
Isn't
Right,
that the turf part of the radical feminism, the
Yes.
trans exclusive?
Yes, but we agree that they should be included. Anyone who presents as female should be included.
So at the last camp, we discussed feminism, and that's what's here. All these things relate to the time period we are now in, the end of 2021. One of our saddest events at this point in our reform line is watching Adventism set its course for shipwreck. Ted Wilson in his October sermon, we'll talk about them now. In the midst of all his other points, he makes two. LGBT people are sinful aberrations from the Word of God. Now I want to give the definition of aberration. The act of wandering from the right way, deviation from truth or moral rectitude, deviation from the straight line. I did not know the meaning of the word, so I looked it up. So they are deviating from the right way, which Ted Wilson would say is a man and a woman. He also makes another point in that sermon. He says, anyone who says there is no Sunday law, and we talked about this last night, no Sunday law, Sabbath Sunday controversy, is a false prophet, and don't listen to them. So they're already prepared to not listen to us by their leader. So now you have it. Go
Does
ahead.
that mean they're listening to us right now?
Huh?
Does that mean that they're listening to our elders right now?
Maybe somebody remembers this more clearly, but Elder Tess said something about she knows that people are listening.
Okay.
I don't remember if she elaborated on it. Maybe somebody remembers that, but she did say that it's becoming, we are becoming on the radar. That radar wasn't the word she used, I don't think,
Okay.
but they are becoming aware of us or listening in what we're saying. Okay, so now you have it. Who do you want to believe, us or the conference? I don't think we have ever so clearly disagreed on the Sunday law. We disagree on what the Sunday law will be about, and we disagree on the position we'll take on that conflict. One benefit of knowing Tamina, and there are many, is insight into what Walter Veith says in German, some of his latest material being only in German. I've spoken about Walter Veith a number of times, but I think what can trip up some people is that Walter Veith is not the conference. In many ways, the conference doesn't seem to like him. They disagree with him. My argument to that is when you look a little deeper, Walter Veith just gives voice to the ultimate conclusions. But the point that we pulled from Ted Wilson's sermon was that he didn't just say that these issues of gender are aberrations. He said that they are Babylon. And this is where I believe that you find the conference and Walter Veith meeting, where you see Ted Wilson define Babylon in the same way that Walter Veith defines Babylon. So we came from discussing radical feminism, which is timely considering the time we are now in, to recent statements coming from the height of the conference leadership of all that relates to gender. And it felt fitting in that context to start asking, what is Babylon? Because that is where we approach gender differently. We disagree with the conference because we define Babylon differently to them. And I had hoped to go into the Omega history of modern Babylon, and we're only going to do the alpha at this camp meeting, so not to rush. But as you might expect, we want to look at it clearly through inspiration and history, not through conspiracy theories, not through Protestantism, not through tradition, Adventist traditions, which come from Protestantism. So we'll look at the structure as a structure. So first I wanted to find a counterfeit. Some of this is a revision of what was done at the Uganda school, which is the one that we just went through and did that review on. I'm going to quote 2 Redemption 21:3, and we want to first define the counterfeit. We're going to move through some things that have already been taught quickly. Men were devoted to glorifying themselves rather than honoring their creator. Satan found easy access to the hearts of men. He's a diligent student of the Bible, and he's much better acquainted with the prophecies than many religious teachers. He knows that it is his intent to keep well informed in the revealed purposes of God, that he may defeat the plans of the infinite. And one more quote. I don't know what NL stood for, if maybe somebody knows what NL stands for. But it's 1 NL. Trying to make sure I watch my time. 1 NL 50.4. Satan is a diligent Bible student. He knows that his time is short, and he seeks at every point to counter the work of the Lord upon this earth. In other passages, she consistently references Satan's work as a counterfeit counter work. And Satan is able to do this because he studies prophecy. If you want to counterfeit what God is doing, you can't shallow read. You can't have a feelings-based reading. Satan is not doing that way as Adventism. What Satan is becoming acquainted with is prophecy. In that first quote, it's prophecy. So if he's going to counterfeit, what is he going to counterfeit? Somebody?
Our message.
A little more specific? Yeah.
The meaning of Sunday law.
Our message is what? It's
Quality.
yeah. Our message is, well, let's read it again. In that first quote, it's prophecy. So if he's going to counterfeit, what's he going to counterfeit?
Prophecy.
Prophecy. We're terrible readers, aren't we? I know I struggle with that myself. So prophecy. For me, the key word in that sentence, Satan is better acquainted with the prophecies than many religious teachers. What I like is the word many. Satan has been studying for thousands of years. Does that mean he knows more than you? The minute you speak about it, he'll know about it, but she doesn't say that he knows more prophecy, that he knows prophecy better than all teachers. And that becomes important when we look at the counterfeit and how exact it is to the truth. So he's a counterfeit, and he knows more than many, but not all. So did Ellen White understand the 5 key waymarks of the reform line?
No, she
No.
didn't.
There are things we understand today in this dispensation that Ellen White did not have full visibility of. Gender is just one of them. So when she says Satan knows better than many, it's not all. He doesn't know better than Ellen White. He didn't know better than William Miller, but he knows better than many who don't love Bible study and prophecy. Bible study with rules, William Miller's rules. So the point being made is that Satan's counterfeit is not going to be exact. There will be differences. So when we go look at the Alpha History of Modern Babylon, beginning in 1899, and this is 16 years before Ellen White passes away, Ellen White is still alive and active. And as Satan works events in Europe, he knows less than Ellen White does. So we need to keep that in mind, and we're going to come back to that point. To counterfeit means to forge, copy, or imitate without authority or right, with a view to deceive or defraud by passing a copy or thing forged for that which is original or genuine. So if Satan wants to counterfeit the seventh-day Sabbath, He's not going to counterfeit by creating some strange ritual disconnected from the day of worship. He just slips it 24 hours later. The counterfeit has to look as close to the original as possible because the original has the value. It's going back to what we said at the beginning. If you see feminism that looks as close as possible to true feminism, radical feminism, can you say, well, it's all feminism? Considering equality as the Sunday law, it's close, it's equality. That's like saying Saturday, Sunday, it's just 24 hours, just move a little forward. It's all worship. It's those tiny details that are life and death. So it has to look as close to the original as possible because it needs to bring to itself some of the value of the original. So the appearance has to look as much to the truth so we can steal from that truth. It wants to steal value. So the appearance has to look as much to the truth, close as it can, because it wants to steal value, which is the purpose, to steal value. What is Satan stealing? He's stealing souls. He creates a counterfeit of the true that is in appearance and looks close. He needs to make that as close to the true as possible because it's about people. The people are what gives it value. If he can steal the people, that is what God is treasuring. But they have accepted a counterfeit coin, a counterfeit gold. There used to be a lot of gold mining in Australia. I think many of us know about fool's gold. People think they found this golden nugget, but it's a rock that looks as close, quite closely like gold. And while they thought they had something of value, when they would go to sell it or have it valued, there's a disappointing discovery that they were holding something virtually worthless. If it looked like a normal rock, no one would be tricked. It had to look like gold. So to quickly review, this is how Satan has always worked. From the beginning of the true plan of redemption, God began with a sacrificial system. You have the true and the counterfeit, and he begins with a sacrificial system. So what do you find with Cain? Cain doesn't go and become some whole new strange type of worship. He takes the true and bends a little piece of it. When we look at ancient Israel, we see that sacrificial system, ancient Israel and ancient Babylon. With the sacrificial system, we see ancient Israel and we see ancient Babylon. These are both church-state unions. So they're church-state and church-state. You understand Samuel. Samuel was the boss, the head of ancient Israel as a state and also as a religion. The two were combined in their leadership. That's more complicated in the kings, but that was not God's doing. Still, even under the kings, it's church-state union. So we saw that as well in one of the other presentations where she used Darius to show that he was a church-state union is in one entity in him. So there's a church-state union. I'll keep going because I'm having different thoughts as we go through this, but okay, so in Daniel 6, Darius makes a decree and then he wants to go back on his word and he can't. Why can Darius not say that he had made a mistake? It's because he's Apis bull, a particular counterfeit version of church and state. He's a God king and a God can't make a mistake. Ancient Israel and ancient Babylon, they both had temples, they both had priesthoods, and that was paganism down here. It's at the cross that we find this transformed. This was a paradigm shift, and we'll find another one at the second advent. So this transformation, and we'll find a transformation at the second advent. But the great change in the history of the world happened at the first advent. A number of things were changed here, and Jesus separated church from state. So you had church and state combined. We saw that here. It was combined in the entity of one person. And then you have church and state separated. this radical transformation at the cross. And I think a lot about the book of Hosea and that next chapter that we'll be working on in Isaiah as well, chapter 54. So there's this radical transformation at the cross, and church and state are separated. So to review, the first advent, this is a radical change. Without me trying to define what that looked like, I said at the second advent, there will be another radical change. For the rest of the history of the great controversy on earth, God separated church and state. The ideas of a temple and a priesthood ended, the sacrificial system ended, and then others were introduced. You had baptism, communion, and we'll put the Sabbath here as well, though it was before, because in the process of counterfeiting, Satan gets more precise. It takes him time. I'm not set on a date here. Maybe some are, but that's okay. But you can mark either 508 or 538 because Satan's wanting to counterfeit. God separated church and state. He wants to counterfeit. And it took him to here. So in 508, Clovis is baptized and the papal church had its first king, its first state. Church and state were separated, and then what they did was have the church exert pressure on the state. Whereas back here with Darius, it's all one person, one entity, and Samuel, one person, one entity. And after the cross, we can see the church state is different. Or can we see the church state is different of the true and the counterfeit? God splits them, but with the counterfeit, they are split and then they still work together. So we see that they're split, but they work together. So again, the counterfeit is not the same as the true, not the exact same. So they're split, but they still work together. And here they're split. So it's not exact. If it was the exact same, it would have to have the same value. If fool's gold was the exact same as real gold, then it would just have to have the value as gold. The lack of value is because of that tiny difference. We see that combination of church and state for the 1290 here, after 508 leading up to 1798. The same time the counterfeit has a deadly wound, the true starts to rise again. So you've got the counterfeit getting a deadly wound, and the true starts to rise again. But papalism is just a counterfeit of the early church. Papalism here is a counterfeit of the early church. The way paganism was a counterfeit of the sacrificial system. So paganism was a counterfeit of the sacrificial system that God introduced. So what we want to spend time on is modern Israel and modern Babylon. We can learn a lot through understanding the counterfeit in the ancient world, paganism or papalism, but we need to understand how the counterfeit manifests today. We all know by now the structures of modern Israel. Millerite history, 1888, and the 144,000. What I want to spend the rest of this camp meeting on is looking at the counterfeit of Millerite history. But if that's the true, then somewhere over here, the Millerite history will begin to be counterfeited. And I've marked that as beginning in 1899. So you've got the true rising up. So then somewhere then the counterfeit also has to rise. And that's 1899. Does everybody understand why she marks it at 1899? We'll keep going.
You talk about Pacelli?
Yeah, the work that he was doing in the Code of Canon Law and all of that. But there's more to that, but that's a simplistic look at it. But yeah. So Satan studies prophecy. He knows better than most. He didn't know better than Ellen White, except that he read everything that she wrote but he couldn't get inside her mind. So he knew well. Modern Israel rises up in 1798. We can go back now with our understanding of reform lines, and we can start laying over our structure the groups called the increase of knowledge, the formalization, and the test. But how does Ellen White view Millerite history? What does she have to say about it? What does she say about Millerite history? I want to suggest she sees it in the following way. What Ellen White discusses is times of scattering and times of gathering. So she would say that God's people were scattered during the 1260. And in 1798, they begin to be gathered. So they're scattered. In 1798, they begin to be gathered. So pre-1798, scattered. And then they're gathered from 1798 to 1844. So from 1798 to 1844 is a gathering time. She then says from 1840 to 1850 that they're again scattered. But beginning in 1850 to 1863, there is a gathering, but it's limited because of the Laodicean condition. 1863, we recognize again they are scattered in this history. So we could then go to 1888, and then we would go to 1989, but this is the alpha history. 1888 is coming in another attempt, but this is the alpha. The alpha here, you've got they were scattered, gathered 1798 to 1844, scattered again till 1850, and then a gathering, but they were in Laodicean condition, and they were going into that Laodicean condition here. So when Satan is going to counterfeit in 1899 through the history of 2 world wars, it's not going to be based on a reform line as we only understood in 2019. It's going to be based on what Ellen White understood and wrote about 150 years earlier. So Satan's going to counterfeit based on what Ellen White had wrote. If this template of scatterings and gatherings, it's this template of scatterings and gatherings we find in modern Babylon. So we should expect when we look at the counterfeit, it's not going to be exact. It's going to be full of mistakes. So this is what Satan knows, and this is what Satan counterfeits. So the true is scattered over 1,260 years, and then it's 101 years between 1798 and 1899. What the papacy suffered in that time period over a century, it wasn't all done in 1798. So we know he receives the deadly wound in 1798, but it wasn't all done in 1798. Right through the 1860s, she's quoting, they had 15,000 square miles of central Italy with thousands of subjects. They levied taxes and paid for this lavish lifestyle with 700 servants and their big and growing bureaucracy around them, that in 1870, Italy's nationalists had a revolution. They throw the Pope out, they get rid of the Papal States, and the Vatican goes from being an earthly empire to a little postage stamp size of property called Vatican City. So this is all transpiring in this history here. So we know the deadly wound is received, but that's not all there was. There was this 101 years of the defeat and crushing. I only included that quote because I wanted us to see that it wasn't all done in 1798. They might argue that 1870 was worse for the papacy than 1798. It's 101 years of crushing disaster. We all know that 30 years after 1899, the papacy is on the rise. We know of the Lateran Treaty. So you've got 1929, you've got the Lateran Treaty, but the Lateran Treaty didn't happen in a vacuum. The Lateran Treaty is one part of a bigger gathering. And it's that larger story that we want to see to understand why, after 101 years of crushing, suddenly the papacy is having success after success, working with fascism. And that larger story of their rise that we're going to discuss, it's that larger story that we're going to discuss in the next study. So to review, we disagree with 2 men who symbolize a spectrum of Adventism. of Adventist leadership. And that's Ted Wilson and Walter Veith. What we disagree with is how they define Babylon in 2021. So we're going to look at modern Babylon, and if we wanted to find Babylon correctly today, we should understand them from when they rose up. So we know precisely where we disagree with Adventism. And in that context is a warning that where we choose to divide the message into what suits and what does not, how much of that is an acceptance of the counterfeit. Because the value difference between a true and a counterfeit is in the fine detail. And to let go of the fine detail, that's called a compromise. And we'll go ahead and run through her prayer and then have a little discussion. So, dear Lord, thank you for how you have led your people all the way from Eden. Thank you that we can meet together. As we still gather in the upper room, I pray that you will unite us, not on feeling. May we be united on truth, bound together with a love for souls, a desire to save others, a sacrificial love that you demonstrated on earth, that we might be fishers of people, beginning with a good example. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, any thoughts to discuss before we break?
Yes. So earlier on, you asked what NL stood for.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Kathy and I both looked up NL. Apparently, there are two NLs. So hers is probably more right if you're looking at the chat, because there was a one before the NL, and so there's probably volumes. So she's probably looking at a pamphlet. Where I was looking, there's also a book called with NL. It's called A New Life. So hers is probably more accurate.
I think that is true, because that's what was coming to my mind was leaflets and pamphlets, but I couldn't put up the whole, didn't have it all clear in my head.
Yeah.
I confirmed that the 1LL, the notebook and leaflets did have that correct quote.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the question that I have is, could you explain to me what is personal equals political?
Oh, I'm not ready to go there right now.
Okay.
Unless somebody else has it better. The personal equals political, because I definitely need to better understand that myself.
I think just a quick thing would say that the things that we do are political, because when we when we show up as radical feminists, our actions are going to be chosen as political. When we wear masks in a store, that's political. Whether we're trying to be health conscious or not, it's making a statement to other people, and they're seeing us as being political, not as just health. So everything we do is political. All our actions.
Okay, so the liberal mainstream, they're doing everything by their choice. They're choosing to do it. But here, you have I want to say a better purpose. It's a greater purpose you're doing it for. It's a political purpose. It's making a statement.
Yes.
But here it's just exercising my freedom. I'm doing it. It's what I choose to do. I want to choose to wear lipstick and all the makeup and short skirts.
Right. And that's why the liberal feminism, the personal does not equal political.
Okay.
Thank you, Christine.
So your life is making a statement.
Right.
Okay.
And
thank you.
Yeah. And in the liberal, because they choose it, they see it as empowerment. So that's, their understanding in the liberal feminism, which is really not, because it's their choices is based on already choices that how can I put it? Options that are already put out there, it's not really their choice. They're, but they're marketing it as their own. And so therefore, because they chose it, their stamp is upon it. Like it's empowering them because they made the choice. But most of those choices that they're making are not genuine because they're already embedded in society, the patriarchal system, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so it sounds like that the choice that they're making is still restricted by the boundaries set by the patriarchal system.
Right. Of what a woman should be like or what a woman is, if that makes sense.
When I was watching or studying about that South Korean and feminist movement, the radical feminist movement that's going on there, the radical feminists were all cutting their hair short. They were all banning makeup, no makeup at all. They were all, and that's when the anti-feminist group, which was made up of mainly men, started saying things like they were ugly and they weren't pretty, and they were doing kind of the same thing that they were doing back in the suffragettes. It's the same thing that was happening over there. And the women in South Korea, they're very bold. And they, and there's such a small percentage of them. There's such a small percentage of them. And they're very courageous, and it's worth looking at what they're doing up there. And Elder Test did post I think it was a couple of articles of South Korea and what's going on over there.
I have a question. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a
Yes.
question. Yeah, I have a question. So feminism right now, is that equal to LGBTQ? Is our stand already, defend the LGBTQ because it already includes equal rights for women? Yeah, I don't know if you understand what I'm asking.
I think we need to review, I know I need to review more to connect all that with the statement. But what comes to my mind is some of those articles that we read on our Wednesday night studies when we went through a few articles on feminism and radical feminism in particular. And if you remember, we read about those that were there. We were reading about the radical lesbians, and hopefully I have this all right. But the radical lesbians, if you guys remember, they also did not accept the trans.
Correct.
Right?
So they were wrong. Yeah.
Well, because they weren't standing for the rights for everybody.
Exactly. So
it's going to be standing for
past.
Go ahead.
So then we should already be past equal rights for women, right? We should all be on the next step, which would be LGBTQ plus, because the fact that Ted Wilson already straight out said this. And the thought came to me that out of all the religious groups, which is the one that's the worst of them all? Isn't it the Adventists? Because they are the ones that are supposedly, representing the true church. You know what I'm saying? And that not that they are, but that's what they were supposed to, where they were supposed to be. They were supposed to be the representatives. In other words, like they're the Israel. What is it? The Israel during the Jewish time, right? During Jesus's time, right? They're the group, the modern day Adventists.
That are most hated, is that what you're saying?
No, the modern day Adventists now, don't they represent the group that lived during Jesus's time? And that they're heading down.
Yeah, you mean Pharisees. You're talking about the Pharisees and the ones that didn't accept his message. Is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
right now, my question is that then the Adventist church, the modern day Adventist church they are representing that group, right?
They're heading
So-
to shipwreck, right?
Yeah. Okay. And so we are Jesus' disciples. And our character, I wanted to say that earlier, where you were talking about, Elaine, that our character, that's what popped into my mind, that God is working right now in each one of us with our character, with all the faults that we have since we birthed. And since he's working with that, at the same time, we are like, we still have to be aware. Like, we cannot say, oh, I'm gonna, just an example, I'm just gonna stop eating, whatever, meat, because, I stopped being vegan and I'm eating, or whatever norm you want to place yourself on. I don't think we have to either go to that extreme either. So, because if we read the spirit of prophecy, we're not going to get that. We're not going to be like, okay, I'm going to wait until I'm perfect. I'm not going to, if I don't get angry, today, then I'm already qualified. Or if I, whatever weakness we have, we cannot go to that extreme either. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to really be aware that God is perfecting our character, because we have to be ready for what's coming, but we still have to step out in spite of. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I think so.
Yeah. Then we cannot get, I don't see in any of you saw the disciples, they denied Jesus. So we still have to be aware that we have to, that God is working our character, but at the same time, it's like we still have to step up. We still have to touch those waters. We still have to step into that, cross the river, so we can go to the other side. That's how I'm thinking. Like, okay, this is how I'm seeing it. How we have to. And the other thing that popped in my mind was, like, I remember wearing rainbow colors in the past. And when somebody pointed, like, that's for the homosexuals, because I didn't know, that rainbow colors are the symbolism for them, So my question now is, can I step out of the house and wear a rainbow colored shirt now? Because I, not against them, definitely. God has just showed me that they are his sons and daughters and his people. And if I wear a rainbow shirt, am I going to be provoking people? Most likely, when I step out. I am not a homosexual. I don't, I'm not one of them, but at the same time, I am with them. You know what I'm saying? I'm not one of them, but I'm with them because they have a right to live the life that they want to live and to marry.
I think.
Yeah. So it's like, should we do that? Should be ready to do that now?
Showing support and equality. Yeah. When that opportunity comes to us, yes, that we can do their rights.
I know I have a t-shirt that I got at Walmart, and it has the glow of the world on it, and it has rainbows, and it says, "We're in it together."
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not speaking on the, I'm not necessarily speaking on the shirt, but I am speaking on, yeah, we're there, but you made a
Because
comment.
that's a public, I just thought of political, because you were talking about political statement.
Yeah,
And I'm thinking, you know what? I'm a Christian. If I say, like, I'm just giving an example, like, I'm going to say I'm a Christian and God loves, and then the rainbow, you know, something like that, to the nature where the homosexual community are going to know that I am a Christian, but yet I'm not hating them. I love them, because I think that's what they need to know.
well, they'll see that we stand for the, for we stand
Yes,
for their
because
quality.
all the Christian, yeah, the Adventists are pinpointing, well, we already know the false Christians, but the Adventists are pinpointing as them being the abomination, the people of, you know, the abominable. I mean, Ted Wilson didn't use that word, but when I looked up the definition of that, it's one of them ends up being queer, abnormal, out of the society norms, something like that, the word that he used. So that's why I was thinking, okay, so how are we going to stand for them? Or is it too early to do that now? So that's why I'm just kind of throwing that question out there.
I think that
It popped in my mind.
leaves
Well,
that for everybody to think about individually and think about Aaron's presentation as he gave it to us. We do have to break for lunch, though. I think I want to say one more thing.
Just one comment, what Christine wrote, what Christine was talking about was the personal equals the political, and I think she's going to get involved with that when she does her presentation on feminism, understanding feminism. What you do personally is a political statement. So if you, what you wear, how you present yourself to the public is a statement, and it is political. So yeah, we do have to, you know, decide what you want to, what statement you want to make. I remember when just before the pandemic kind of broke out and nobody was wearing masks, and they were saying not to wear masks, I took a conscious effort to choose to wear a mask, and I went everywhere and I was the only one wearing a mask, and people would look at me like crazy, but I wasn't just doing it for health reasons. I was doing it to make a statement, and there were one or two people that asked me about it. And then I came across one person that was actually wearing a mask, and she came up to me and she said, "Oh, I guess you know, huh?" And I said, "Yeah." And so it is a political statement. What you do in public is a political, you're making a statement. That's all I want to say.
Keep it all in consideration in light of what we went through this morning and listened to. So, but let's go ahead and break for lunch, and we're going to be wind up. Luke, if you're there and hear us, we're going to start a little bit later because we're late breaking for lunch. So we'll be back here. We'll meet back here at 1:45. I hope that works out okay for you, Luke. We'll be back here at 1:45.
Yes, that does. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all sweet.
Okay. We'll see you guys back here at 1:45.